Hi everyone, my name is Anna. I'm one of the FASD Prevention Program coordinators with the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, and I live in the homeland of the Cree, Dakota, and Métis nations. I would like to take this time to honor these and all Indigenous nations from Turtle Island who have been the caretakers and one with this land for millennia. I'm happy to be here with Soumya, my colleague at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, to talk a bit about FASD and prenatal development. The Saskatchewan Prevention Institute is a nonprofit organization that works to reduce the occurrence of disabling conditions in children, including fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The Prevention Institute raises awareness by providing training, information, and resources based on current best evidence. We believe that all children, regardless of ability, have the right to be the best physical, social, and emotional health possible. Our programs include child injury prevention, child traffic safety, community action program for children, early childhood mental health, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder prevention, maternal and infant health, Nobody's Perfect parenting program, and sexual and reproductive health. In this presentation, we will cover what is FASD, its prevalence, a snapshot of diagnostic guidelines of FASD, how the fetus develops during 9 months of pregnancy, sensitive periods of fetal development, alcohol culture and its impacts on fetal development, how FASD is brain-based, who can have a child with FASD, how we can prevent FASD, a bit of the stigma around it, and finally, why FASD is a community matter. So we'll begin talking about what is FASD. FASD, or Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, is a diagnostic term used to describe impacts on the brain and body of individuals prenatally exposed to alcohol. It is a lifelong disability, which means it does not go away. But with the necessary supports in place, people with FASD can reach their full potential and live a meaningful life. The current best estimate for the prevalence of FASD in Canada is of 4% of the population. That is around 1,406,000 people in Canada and around 44,000 people in Saskatchewan, based on the last census data of 2016. A prevalence of 4% means that 1 in 25 people living in Canada are affected by FASD. Do you remember how many students there were in your classes at school? In a class of 25 kids, it is fair to assume that 1 has FASD. But despite that, most Canadians go through school without meeting a single person with FASD. And that makes sense, because FASD is what we call an invisible disability. Most of the times, not even the person who has FASD knows it. And that's because there may be no obvious physical signs of prenatal alcohol exposure. Instead, there are impairments on behavior and learning abilities. And on top of that, only a small fraction of people with FASD have been diagnosed. And talking about diagnosis, FASD has been a diagnostic term in Canada for the past 6 years only. The first diagnostic term was fetal alcohol syndrome, coined by Jones and Smith in a publication on The Lancet in 1973. The idea was to encourage prevention, but unfortunately, one of the results of this diagnosis was shame, judgment, and stigma. A term slightly different is partial fetal alcohol syndrome, which was used when not all of the characteristics of FAS were present, but there was knowledge of prenatal alcohol exposure. It didn't mean a less severe form of FAS. It was just a different form that didn't tick all the boxes for FAS. Then there is the term alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, or ARND. This is the most common form of FASD, and it used to be a diagnosis for people who met the criteria for FAS, except for the facial features. That's when the disability is invisible because there's no physical signs, but rather impairments on brain domains. And lastly, there is ARBD, or alcohol-related birth defects, which used to describe congenital abnormalities related to the heart, the skeleton, the kidneys, the eyes, and the ears associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. Since 2015, we have this new set of guidelines for the diagnosis, and these guidelines were developed by a steering committee of specialists for the Canada Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Research Network. And these guidelines adopt FASD as a diagnostic term to describe a broader spectrum of presentations and disabilities resulting from alcohol exposure in utero. So in the new guidelines, there are two possible diagnoses and one designation that captures individuals who do not meet the diagnostic criteria but are still at risk of FASD. One possible diagnosis is FASD without facial features. And that's when there is a confirmation of prenatal alcohol exposure and at least 3 brain domains impaired, that is invisible. The second diagnosis is FASD with facial features, or sentinel facial features, SFF. There may or may not be a confirmation of prenatal alcohol exposure, but the 3 facial features are there. And a smaller than usual palpable feature length, which is this space between the 2 corners of our eyes, and a smoother than usual philtrum, which is this growth between our nose and upper lip, and a thinner than usual upper lip. So if these 3 facial features are identified along with deficits in at least 3 brain domains or microcephaly, then the diagnosis is FASD with facial features. There are some cases, though, where it may be difficult to get to a conclusion. The diagnostic criteria are not met either because some domains cannot be assessed with confidence until the person is older, or because, because of other confounding factors, such as temporary life stress or illness. So in these cases where the possibility of a future FASD diagnosis is still considered, the person assessed is considered at risk for neurodevelopmental disorder and FASD, and they may be assessed in the future with less confounders.
So before we continue to talk about FASD, let's take a step back and talk about fetal development and why is it important to understand fetal development. So when we know about healthy fetal development, it is easier to understand how consuming alcohol when pregnant can affect the fetus. In this presentation, we will start at the very beginning, but before that, we will first see how genetics and epigenetics plays a role in this process. So at the time when fertilization occurs, both the mother and father gives 23 chromosomes to their new baby through the egg and the sperm. So the baby will have 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs. These chromosomes have hundreds of genes in them that carry the genetic information. And this information can be called as a blueprint for the development of the baby. These genes and the genetic information decide things such as the color of the eye, type of the hair, and how tall or short a person will be, the personality, the height, weight, and brain development. And one of these 23 pair determines if the baby will be a boy or a girl. There are some factors that can affect what genes do, such as stress, trauma, or using alcohol during pregnancy. And these factors are called the environmental factors. These environmental factors influences which genes are turned on and which stays off, and just like a light bulb. And this is called the epigenetics. In that, it can affect the genes in future generations as well. And alcohol is one of the examples of the environmental factors that affects what the gene do. So now since we have seen a snapshot of how genetics and epigenetics play a role in the development of fetus, let's start at the beginning of the fetal development. Each month, most women's bodies are getting ready to have a baby, and this is called the menstrual cycle. It is different for all women. Some people get the cycle in 21 days and the others 35 days. When a woman finishes her period, her uterus walls start to thicken and gets ready to look after an unborn baby. And this thickened uterus wall is also called endometrium. If an egg is fertilized, it will attach to the endometrium, and I will discuss more about it in the next few slides. But if the egg is not fertilized or implantation does not happen, the endometrium begins to break down, and that's when a woman gets her period, and in which they are getting rid of that endometrium so that the whole process can begin again. Now let's see what happens in the fertilization, when fertilization occurs. So when the sperm is released, it makes a long journey to get to the healthy egg, but only a few of the sperm might reach the egg. When a sperm gets past the lining of the egg, the fertilization occurs. And this fertilization is the beginning of the pregnancy, and it is at this time it is called conception. Interestingly, the fertilization can happen even if the men's penis does not enter the vagina and ejaculate. If a woman has unprotected sex during this time that an egg is released and healthy, the fertilization can happen. Pregnancy can even take place if unprotected sex happens before the egg is released, and that is because sperm can live in the body for up to 6 days. Once the egg is fertilized, it travels down the fallopian tube. And let's see the process in the video.
Within a week of conception, your fertilized egg, known as a blastocyst, will make its way to your uterus. The egg is about the size of a pen tip. In days, the cells in the egg arrange themselves into groupings. The inner cell mass will become your baby. The outer cells will become the amniotic sac and placenta. The blastocyst then sheds its protective casing in a process called hatching and burrows into the lush uterine wall. Around week 5, your developing baby is the size of a sesame seed. The cells that once formed the blastocyst's inner cell mass begin organizing and arranging, giving shape to the young embryo and forming primitive organs. Your baby's brain and spinal cord are visible through his translucent skin. Right around this time, your baby's circulatory system also forms, and his heart begins to beat. Your baby looks more like a tiny tadpole than a human. He's drawing nutrients and oxygen through the newly formed placenta and umbilical cord. By week 9, the embryonic tail is gone. Your baby's looking more human every day. Protruding limbs and fingers, a defined nose, mouth, and eyes, and tiny earlobes. Your new resident is about the size of a grape and weighs a fraction of an ounce. It's hard to believe how rapidly one cell evolves in such a short time into the unmistakable body of a baby.
Soumya, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So in the video, we watched how the fertilization occurs and how the journey of the pregnancy begins. So the pregnancy is approximately 9 months long, or to be more exact, the average length of pregnancy is 40 weeks. It is divided into 3 equal parts or trimesters, and each trimester is approximately 13.5 weeks long. As you have watched in the video, the first trimester begins at the conception and goes until 12th week. In the first trimester, the central nervous system and major organs develop, as well as the heart starts to beat. And during this time, the ribs, backbone, digestive tract, and muscles also begin to develop. Many of the external body parts, such as face, arms, legs, feet, and toes, are formed at this time as well. And at the 9th week, the baby is now called a fetus. And this time is often described as the period of growth and finishing. The brain, spinal cord, organs, and muscles become more organized and begin to work together. And these connections give the fetus the ability to move for the movement and behavior. An ultrasound at this time can show the kicking, arm and hand movements, thumb sucking, and mouth open. So on the left side, you can see it is a zygote which has a yolk sac attached to it. This yolk sac provides blood and nourishment to the fetus until the placenta and umbilical cord is formed. But the 3rd month of pregnancy, the placenta and umbilical cord are fully developed and takes over the responsibility of the yolk sac. The placenta is an organ that develops in a woman's uterus during this pregnancy, and the umbilical cord connects the baby to the mother through placenta. The placenta begins to provide food and oxygen to the baby and helps to get rid of his waste. Then in the 2nd trimester, the developing fetus continues to grow and mature. And details such as eyelashes, eyebrows, and hair are now grown and present. And brain continues to develop as well. During this time, the mother usually begins to feed her baby. Moving to the 3rd trimester, in this, the development is mostly focused on increasing the size and functional development of the fetus. The brain continues to grow, and the cerebral cortex, which is also called the thinking part of the brain, gets bigger. During this period of the brain development, the grooves and convolutions typical of the adult brain begin to deepen. And this allows the brain to be larger and have more volume without the head getting bigger. So far we have seen how a baby grows and develops quickly during all 9 months of the pregnancy. And the growth of the fetus starts at the conception, and it grows throughout the 9 months. There are times during pregnancy when certain body parts or systems are developing quickly, and these parts and systems are very vulnerable at this time. However, the brain and nervous system are developing throughout the whole pregnancy, making it more susceptible to impacts from environmental factors. So now we have seen the fetal development and what a healthy pregnancy looks like. Let's go back to FASD and see how alcohol affects the fetus. So we know that FASD is caused due to the prenatal alcohol exposure. When an individual gets pregnant, in few weeks the embryo sac is formed around the baby to provide the nutrition and blood, and in few months the placenta takes over its function. So when someone consumes alcohol during pregnancy, it will go to the fetus. And when it goes to the fetus, it stays longer than mother, because fetus has a slower metabolism, and this gives alcohol a longer time to stay in the fetus and can cause more alterations in the growth. Alcohol is a classic terodogen, capable of inducing a wide range of developmental abnormalities, and is the leading cause of the birth defects. A terodogen is anything outside to the fetus that causes a physical or functional disability in the fetus during the pregnancy or when the baby is born. So a terodogen is anything that woman is exposed to during the pregnancy and that can impact or harm her unborn baby. Terodogens can be anything that she breathes in, swallows, or touches. And you can see that they can be classified into 4 main categories, like physical agents, infectious agents, metabolic conditions, and drug and chemicals like alcohol, tetracyclines, mercury, etc. So use of alcohol in pregnancy can cause a broad range of disability, and these can range from mild to severe and can result in a unique mix of impacts. The impact of alcohol will have on the fetus is not the same for all the fetuses. It is influenced by a number of factors, such as timing of exposure, whether the alcohol was consumed at the beginning of the pregnancy or throughout the pregnancy. So when was the alcohol consumed? Then it also depends on amount of alcohol and the pattern of drinking, whether it was a standard drink every night or whether it was a binge drinking. So it depends on the amount of alcohol taken and the pattern of drinking. The other factors are nutritional status of mother as well as genetics. But why is alcohol so popular and widely acceptable to consume? Alcohol is legally and culturally accepted in Canadian society and is widely used socially. In media, advertising, and entertainment shows alcohol is a beverage that will do no harm, and it is promoted as a means of being popular, fun, athletic, and social. And alcohol has become a norm in the society. In Canada, the sale of alcohol is regulated by the provincial governments, and it is most commonly used psychoactive substance in Canada and in Saskatchewan. So society's acceptance of alcohol can lead to relaxed attitudes about drinking, and little attention is paid to its possible negative outcomes. The alcohol is linked to almost every part of socializing, and those who choose not to drink are often pressured and questioned as to their reasons. The availability and acceptance of alcohol can make it less likely that people will look at their own drinking habits. For many young women, there is an enormous amount of social pressure to drink, and there are many alcohol issues for women. Like women are generally more vulnerable to the effects of alcohol because on average, women weigh less than men, which makes them reach a higher blood alcohol level faster. And women have more tissue, causing alcohol to be absorbed more slowly. And women have less water in their bodies to dilute the alcohol. So if a woman and a man drink the same amount of alcohol, her alcohol concentration will be higher. And women don't have the alcohol metabolizing enzymes as well to break down the alcohol. So the alcohol stays in the female body for a longer time. And how women drinks also plays a part. She drinks shots at a party where the male is drinking beer. So according to the 2017 Canadian Tobacco, Alcohol and Drug Survey, the drinking rates in Canada were analyzed and found 78.2% as national drinking average rate. And Saskatchewan residents who are aged 15 years and over have reported 78.4% using alcohol in the past 12 months, which is slightly higher than the average, national average. To reduce the short and long-term health risk and to promote culture of moderation, Canada developed the Canadian Low-Risk Alcohol Drinking Guidelines in 2011. In the Low-Risk Alcohol Drinking Guidelines, they have defined what a standard drink is. A standard drink is a measure of how much pure alcohol you are drinking, and it varies on the concentration of alcohol in a beverage, and is also different in different countries. In Canada, a standard drink is 17.5 milliliters of pure alcohol, which is equivalent to a bottle of a beer, 12 ounce, a bottle of cider, which is 12 ounce, and a glass of wine, 5 ounce, and a glass of shot of spirit, which is 1.5 ounce, and it's 40% alcohol. There are guidelines that have upper and lower limit for women, men, and youth to reduce the long and short-term risk, and where there's zero alcohol consumption safest. So for example, the guidelines to reduce long-term risk says women can have between 0 to 2 standard drinks per day or 0 to 10 drinks a week. Whereas for men, they can have 0 to 3 standard drinks per day or 0 to 15 drinks a week. But remember, these numbers are the upper limit, not a goal. And there are guidelines that recommend when not using alcohol is best, such as when an individual is pregnant or planning to be pregnant and during breastfeeding. There's absolute no alcohol is safest. Or when someone is taking medications or other drugs that can interact with alcohol. Or someone living with mental or physical health problems or has alcohol dependency. And there are so many like this where zero alcohol is the safest. There are also tips for the safer drinking, and such as set limits, and there are some more that you can see on this page. So as recommended in the guideline, that it is the safest to not to use alcohol when an individual is pregnant or planning to be pregnant and during breastfeed. The reason is, once this common blood supply is in place, anything that that goes in the mother's bloodstream, like food, water, nicotine, alcohol, medication, or anything, it will all be shared with the fetus as well. And as I mentioned earlier, when it goes to the fetus, it stays longer because the fetus has a slower metabolism, and it gives more time, to the fetus, and can cause more alterations in the growth. And we have seen earlier that brain is an organ that grows throughout the pregnancy and continues to adulthood. Therefore, there is a really higher probability of brain to get affected. So during the fetal development, again, the brain, we have seen how the growth begins and how the brain growth starts between the second and third week and continues to adulthood. It develops from the bottom up and starting with the brainstem. So in the first trimester, the neural tube forms, part of which becomes the spinal cord and part of which becomes the brain. Major structures of the brain begin to form, and including the cerebrum, and the brain continues to grow new neurons and make connections with them. In the second trimester, parts of the brain begin to receive signals from ears and eyes. Brain continues to make more connections, and cerebral cortex starts to separate into lobes. And between 7 to 9 months, or in the third trimester, brain begins to form grooves and indentation typical of a more mature brain. Fetal brain waves can be detected at this time. And auditory and visual cortex begin to function, and brain continues to grow. And most of the neurons that will develop are already in place, and it is now 1/4 size and weight of an adult brain. So what does brain do for you? When a brain is healthy, it lets you consider all the options, read body language and cues that are unspoken, balances work and school schedules, looks ahead to predict consequences of decision, and many more. But to successfully perform all these functions, brain requires a communication tool to communicate with the whole body. And for that, brain has over 100 billion neurons and 10 times that amount of glial cell present to help the brain to communicate with the body. And these neurons pass information from top section, which is the dendrites, down to the axons, which are the roots of the neuron. For the brain and body to function, the part of the brain that needs to communicate, this is done through nerves and neurons. And this is all or nothing process. So if there's not enough stimulation, neurons don't transmit the information. So a child with FASD can have below average or above average IQ because of the alcohol, because alcohol affects brain differently. And when the brain is working properly, the information from the senses goes straight right in the right collection place in the brain. And the brain organizes the data, and this state is sent to the frontal lobe or executive area of the brain for a decision. So if the brain is working well, it makes a decision based on the information. So for example, run for your life if a bear is coming. But if it is not working well, it might stand and look at the bear and instead of getting out of the way. And another way to describe this is when the brain is talking to itself using the electrical circuit. So how many of you have experienced a light that flickers, like goes on and off, or flashes, or stays on, or just stays off? I think we have all experienced that. So it is like that light. So the light is sometimes working and sometimes not. So the brain affected by alcohol do similar things. There are days when the circuit is working well, and there are days when it is not working well. And the brain functions differently from day to day. So if the alcohol is consumed during the pregnancy, it can create a lifelong brain that can't read emotions or body language of other people, maybe respond slowly, or can't link the cause and effects, has difficulty with the time and money management, or forgets the information, and many more things.
So now I'd like to talk. Oh, I cannot hear my voice. Oh, thank you. So now I'd like to talk about the implications of FASD being brain-based. As we just covered, FASD is the result of changes to the developing brain at the neurochemical and structural levels. Given the wide variation of alcohol effects on brain development, people with FASD won't have the same challenges. According to the degree and types of challenges that individuals with FASD experience in their daily living, in order to reach their full potential, they may need different levels of support with motor skills, physical health, learning, memory, attention, communication, emotional regulation, and social skills. For our brain to work, our neurons have to communicate with each other. We can compare this communication to traveling from one place to another. It can be fast or slow, depending on which road you take. On a typically developed brain, neurons can send their messages very smoothly, similar to when we travel on a paved highway. Their messages are clear and quickly get to where they need to go. Sometimes there may be rain or snow on the highway, which we can think of as a difficult situation to which we need to respond with more attention and may slow us. But we still keep going and eventually arrive to the same destination without much trouble, as well as the messages in a typically developed brain. For someone with FASD, things look differently. When their neurons send a message, the path it has to travel, maybe it's slower or inconsistent. It's more like driving on a one-lane dirt road with bumps and potholes. The message can still be delivered, but it may take longer and demand more energy. And if there is rain or a snowstorm on its way, the road may get blocked and the message may not arrive. This can cause frustration on both the person with FASD and the ones around them. And if learning how to deal with this inconsistency sounds so difficult for a person with a typically developed brain, imagine how does it feel for someone who can't opt out of the dirt road. For us to have an idea of how diverse can be the impact of these brain changes on the lives of people with FASD, here's a list with the 10 brain domains that are associated with an FASD diagnosis. FASD can affect motor skills, the neuroanatomy or neurophysiology, which is how the brain and nervous systems are built and work, the cognition, the language, academic achievement, memory, attention, so how we focus and stay on task, including those tasks that are not very much enjoyable or more challenging. It also affects our executive function. It affects regulation, so how we control emotions, react to stress, react to different situations. And it affects adaptive behavior, social skills, and social communication. And there's also the sensory domain. It is not included on the assessment, but it is known to have an impact. It can impact all other brain domains and influence on the assessment. So how does this look across the lifespan? During early childhood, it looks like irritability, insecure attachment, and depressive symptoms. Later in childhood, the challenges can grow to social problems, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, anxiety, depression, intellectual and learning disability, and so on. Throughout adolescence and young adulthood, it can exacerbate to suicide thoughts and even attempts, alcohol misuse, aggression, antisocial personality, depression, anxiety, and psychotic disorders. If stigmatized and left unsupported, it is not surprising that social and mental health issues developed over time. Now, to have a better idea of what that feels and looks like in the life of someone who has a FASD, we'll watch a short video of where Miles Himmerich shares a bit of what it feels to live with FASD. Miles is a Canadian motivational speaker and consultant that draws from his personal experience to raise awareness of FASD, to inspire audiences to change the way they view the disability, and to empower those with a disability to find their purpose.
Hi, my name is Miles Himmerich, and I'm diagnosed with FASD, Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. Living with FASD is not the easiest thing. There's a lot of things that I've faced in my life, and there's a lot of things that I'll continue facing in my life. FASD is a lifelong disability. FASD is brain injury. It also affects my bones, my muscles, my tissues, everything in my body. So I'm constantly facing things, whether it's facing issues trying to remember things that I have to do day to day, things like eating, whether it's having problems walking down the street because my bones and my legs hurt, whether it's remembering to pay bills because of that routine and that repetition of trying to do those things and not always remembering how to do them. Those are just some of the things that I face, and I'll always face. As successful as I've been in my life, and I've been very successful, I also understand that there are things that are struggles for me. Understanding that there are things that are struggles for me and being okay with that has helped me get to a point where I've been able to be successful with my life. You see, I have to understand that I'm gonna have struggles, that I'm gonna have tough days. I'm human like everybody else. There's gonna be things that I can't do. You see, living with a brain injury, it made going to school and going into the work field very difficult. I couldn't remember how to do the work, but then there were days that I could do the work. There were times where I was doing fine in school. I would be able to do the math and remember how to solve all the problems. And it looked like I got it. It looked like I understood it. Then the next day, I couldn't remember the first step to solving the problem. My teachers would be frustrated, my parents would be frustrated because they'd look at it and go, "You just did this yesterday and you totally got it. We know you can do it." But as frustrated as they were, can you imagine how frustrating it was for me? How frustrating it was to think to myself, I just did this. Why can't I do it now? Every single day, there was something that I had to face. It became very difficult. Got to a point where I felt like going to school every day, I was going to this place and just banging my head on the wall, not getting anywhere, not having these successes that everyone else around me looked like they were having. Then I leave school and I think, okay, well, all those problems are gone, but they weren't. You see, now I have to go into society and get a job. And just like school, I couldn't remember the steps that I had to do at that job, even though quite often they were the same steps every day. Some days I'd be able to do them, and then other days I wouldn't. And my boss, my manager, my supervisor would look at me and say the same thing the teacher said. "You just did it yesterday. We saw you do it. We know you can do it. Come on. You're just not trying. You showed up on time 3-4 days in a row. You're late now 3-4 days in a row. You're being lazy." It was difficult because here I was seen as someone that wasn't trying, someone that was lazy. All those names that people were putting on me, I was taking them in my own head and adding to them. I was hearing I was lazy. I was hearing I wasn't trying. And I was telling myself, "You're stupid, you're dumb." It's difficult to wake up every day knowing that you're gonna struggle, knowing that there's a good chance today something is just not gonna work. As I became older, I started realizing that it wasn't just things like memory that I was struggling with. It wasn't things like being on time that I was struggling with. I was starting to struggle with physical things. My legs started hurting. Here I was, 12, 13 years old, and I'd have to call my dad to come pick me up because I went on a bike ride, and my legs are too sore and tired to come back home. It felt like my joints just weren't connecting. You know, my bones and my muscles hurt, and I didn't really understand how to explain this. You see, this past year, in April of 2016, I was very fortunate to work with two other colleagues who they themselves also live with FASD, and we shared this health survey. This was a health survey that we created about the physical issues of FASD. Some of the numbers that came back were absolutely amazing. The general population numbers compared to the numbers of us individuals living with FASD and the differences were unreal. There were things like dementia. We asked about that. Now, this is something that you think is for people who become older. You know, they get dementia and they have problems with their memory. In our population on the survey, now these were people that were the average age of 28 years old with a diagnosis of FASD reporting having dementia. 28, 29, 30 years old. In general population, fairly low number reporting dementia. In our population of FASD, extremely high percentage. Over 100 times higher percent in our field of, or in our population of FASD of people struggling with hearing loss as a child. If you can't hear properly, but you don't know how to explain that because you're a child, how does that look? Oh, you're just not listening. You're not paying attention. You're not trying. How did it look as a teenager who, oh, come on. You went all the way out there, you biked out there, you're playing in the playground, you're fine to walk from this class to the next class. Stop being lazy. You see, FASD affects the whole body. Affects you for a lifetime. It's a brain injury. FASD is something that's very difficult to live with, very difficult to understand. I've had FASD since birth, and I'll have it my whole entire life. People don't always understand that. They'll see that I'm doing okay and that I'm succeeding and some days are good. And they don't realize that I still need you there, even when they're good days, because those good days are going to turn into bad days. That's just the reality of it, that I will struggle. But if you can stick beside me and stay there and support me on the good days and the bad days, then it'll be a lot easier to get through those bad days.
Okay, that was a great video. So, who can have a child with FASD? So, all individuals who consumes alcohol while they are pregnant are at risk, irrespective of ethnicity, social economic status, or sex. And blaming and shaming someone for consuming alcohol doesn't address the issue. Instead, it perpetuates the stigma. However, understanding the reasons for alcohol consumption and creating a supportive environment for expecting women does. So let's see what are some of the common reasons for an individual to consume alcohol. So about 50% of pregnancies in Canada are unintended. Individuals who are not planning their pregnancy engage in risky behaviors such as consuming alcohol or other substances. And many individuals continue alcohol use until the pregnancy is confirmed. This happens with either a planned or an unintended pregnancy, thus making it one of the top reasons for alcohol use in pregnancy. Partners drinking behaviors. So partners play a very crucial role in planning and supporting healthy and alcohol-free pregnancy. Many women quit drinking or cut down their alcohol consumption during pregnancy, but this is not necessarily the case for their partners. Studies have shown the partner's drinking habit or dependency can influence pregnant women's alcohol use. In in an Australian study, it was reported around 75% of women who consumed alcohol in pregnancy drank with their partners. And in many cases, partners initiated the drinking. Partners generally have similar drinking patterns, and thus it is recommended that partners stop drinking alcohol around the pregnant lady. The third is violence and abuse. So violence is one of the major predictors of alcohol use in pregnancy. Research shows that women who are pregnant may experience higher level of violence than women who are not pregnant, which can cause difficulty in accessing medical care, accurate information on health, um, accurate information on health, pregnancies, restrict access to substance treatment services, and women who are being forced to drink because of their partner's drinking habits. According to National Institute of Drug Abuse, women have different reasons for using drugs, including fight exhaustion, coping with pain, and abusive relationships and partners. And few other reasons are drinking habits, dependency or addiction, stigma, which is individuals is afraid to talk about alcohol use because of shame and blame, family history of alcohol use, and social pressure from family and friends. So at the Prevention Institute, okay, it's not moving. So at the Prevention Institute, our goal is healthy children, and we work to reduce the occurrence of the disabling condition in children, including the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Many people who do not understand the reasons for consuming alcohol during pregnancy, they've got assumptions about who uses alcohol in pregnancy and why. And some of these incorrect assumptions and misunderstandings lead to stigma and judgment for women who consume or have consumed during their pregnancy. This makes the issue even more complex and creates a barrier to prevention and support for women and their families. In many countries and cultures where alcohol is legal and widely accepted, it is normal for anyone to consume alcohol. And there could be many reasons for consuming that. And it all doesn't disappear when a woman gets pregnant. For some women, it is easier to quit consuming alcohol when they are planning their pregnancy and during pregnancy. However, it could be extremely difficult for some. And women who use alcohol in pregnancy come from all walks of life and have a variety of life circumstances. So when we talk about prevention, we are talking about how we prevent or reduce the alcohol exposure in pregnancy and reduce the impacts that people with FASD may face in their lives. So you can see this is a 4-part model of prevention, and this diagram was outlined and identified by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And level 1 is about raising the public awareness about FASD and the risk of drinking alcohol during pregnancy. This information is usually shared through primary prevention campaign or through public education, for example, in school systems, health clinic, or communities. The message may be adapted to the audience depending on their age, income, ethnicity, and other differences. And in level 1, it raises awareness, but does not necessarily lead to behavior and attitude change. And these messages may provide referral to available services and supports, alternatives to drinking alcohol, referrals for more information. Few of the resources that we have at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute are these in front of on your screen. So we have some amazing infographics, like what have you heard about pregnancy and alcohol. There's posters. We have a lot of resources for this particular level, and this is why is a infographic card which focuses on the father's role or the partner's role.
So now that we've talked about how FASD looks like, that it's brain-based and how alcohol affects fetal development, I'd like to open this parenthesis to talk a bit about the father's role in FASD prevention. Although a father cannot expose prenatally his child to alcohol, studies suggest that a father's use of alcohol before pregnancy could result in reduced sperm quality and quantity, alterations in shape and ability to penetrate the egg, changes to the genetic contribution of the sperm, and epigenetic changes, which are changes on how our genes are expressed, like switches that can turn the expression of our genes on or off. On top of less healthy sperm, father's alcohol use before conception has also been associated with higher levels of spontaneous abortion, lower levels of live births, lower infant birth weight and gestational age, higher rates of heart malformations. So considering that fathers can make the fetus more susceptible to prenatal alcohol exposure and influence the amount of prenatal alcohol exposure through the mother, male partners do contribute to the potential for developing FASD. That's one of the reasons we include them on our prevention campaigns, like you can see here in this poster. This is why this father supported her not to drink during her pregnancy.
In level 2 initiatives, they are more targeted. So providing safe space for women of childbearing age to have safer discussions about reproductive health, contraceptions, pregnancy, and alcohol use. So this is important because it may help individuals to prepare for pregnancy, offers opportunities for health professionals to educate women about the risk of using alcohol during pregnancy, and may also help at-risk women or women struggling with alcohol use disorders to address the addiction issues and make positive changes in their lives. And some of our resources that we have for level 2 are like a resource for service providers. There's another one which women drinks alcohol at risky level. There's an info card and a few more. There's one very interesting resource for anyone who is hesitant on how to initiate these tough conversation. This is a great resource for service providers, and it helps to talk to all women of childbearing age about their alcohol use and the risks of drinking during pregnancy. Level 3 and level 4 are extremely specialized and targeted, working specifically with pregnant women who use substances and experience other systemic barriers to health. This level of prevention helps pregnant women who are using alcohol and are looking for supports. Services are specialized and culturally safe. In level 4, the programs may not always be thought of as a FASD prevention programs, but they can potentially reduce the substance use in future pregnancies. And they provide postpartum treatment and supports for new mothers and provide services that help reduce their current substance use. These programs also provide support such as infant development, traditional parenting, and early childhood intervention programs. It helps her to continue to improve her health and the health of her children. And this level of prevention contributes to healthier parenting. Some of the examples of such programs are like Sanctum 1.5, Raising Hopes in Regina, the Mothering Project, Mothercraft, and Shive, etc.
So something else we would like to talk about is about the stigma around FASD. Stigma is still a huge challenge for the prevention of FASD. As a pregnant person who consumes alcohol, it's usually shamed by others, considered unfit to born and raise their child, and many times seen as the sole responsible and guilty for her child having FASD. Stigma poses such a challenge to public health that in 2019, the annual public health report in Canada was about stigma. According to this report, when we stigmatize people, we affect their chances for a long and healthy life. And stigma in the health system can be particularly harmful, as people are prevented from accessing the health information services and resources they need, creating mistrust and further exclusion. The report shows how stigma operates in 4 different levels. At the individual level, stigma can lead to shame and discourage people to access support. At the interpersonal level, stigma may operate through offensive or inappropriate language that reinforces stereotypes. At the institutional level, stigma can operate through an environment that is not inclusive or through the lack of empathy from staff. Sorry, my cat is, she wants to jump on the table. So at the institutional level, stigma can operate through an environment that is not inclusive or through the lack of empathy from staff. And at the population level, stigma can be seen from, for example, in discriminatory policies and laws that cause harm and result in marginalized groups being treated differently. So bringing it back to FASD and FASD prevention, I find that a great way to learn how we can address stigma is to ask those who experience it. And that's what a group of researchers did in Vancouver. They asked pregnant and parenting women who use substances what they would like practitioners to know. And I think this can extend to us as community members as well. They want us to know that mothers want to succeed. We shouldn't assume they are not trying or that they have chosen the challenges they face. Language matters. We show respect for their autonomy when we say things like, I've seen this help others, maybe this would help you. Instead of saying, you should do this, you should do that. Also, they don't want our pity, but our empathy, as well as more compassion and less condescension. They would like us to get behind them and be supportive. They want us to listen to them, to be curious about what might work for each of them. They want us to be educated. There's a lot of things involved in addiction, and it's a complex matter. They want us to understand that just because they are still using, it doesn't make them a bad mother. And there's not only one path to recovery. Our support is more helpful when we listen to where they are at in their journey and what will work for them. And finally, they want us to not judge, but to care. So a wrap-up message we would like to leave with you is that FASD is a community matter. When we look back to the risks and protective factors of prenatal alcohol exposure, there is so much intertwined there. Food security, safe housing, access to services and resources, healthy relationships, connection with culture, spirituality and nature, life skills, support from extended family. We cannot discount community from this equation, for the better or for the worse. And that's why we believe that informing the community about it can make a huge difference to how supported it can be of pregnant people, people with FASD and their families.